Tonight our guest is Bob Kleckler, a retired chemical engineer who has written a book titled Let's End Our Literacy Crisis. How did you decide to make this book?
In 1985, I read Jonathan Cazol's shocking new book titled Illiterate America. Cazol wrote about 34 different types of serious physical, mental, emotional, medical, and financial problems of the many illiterate people he knew and loved. He stated that if most of us had to endure the problems that illiterates have to endure every day of their lives, we would consider it a crisis. I decided to use my research skills as an engineer to see if there's a solution to the problem. I spent more than a year reading every book I could find on the subject of my research. I read dozens of books from the large Marriott Research Library at the University of Utah. What I discovered is what made me decide to write this book.
What did you discover?
I discovered the primary cause of English illiteracy. The very first step in solving any problem is to find out what is causing the problem. Otherwise, you can spend a lot of time and money fighting the symptoms of the problem without actually solving the foundational cause of the problem. A good analogy is fighting the symptoms of pneumonia with cough medicine, decongestants, and painkillers instead of taking antibiotics to cure the disease. We have been fighting the symptoms of the difficulty in learning to read English for more than 90 years now. Although there are obviously many different reasons why any one student does not learn to read, there's only one problem affecting every student. Books I read by Dr. Frank Laubach made the primary cause of illiteracy very clear to me. Dr. Laubach spent almost his entire life teaching thousands of adult illiterates around the world how to read. He taught in more than 300 different alphabetic languages. He prepared reading primers for 313 languages and even invented spelling systems for 220 languages that were unwritten. His books, Teaching the World to Read and 40 Years with a Silent Billion, document a truly amazing fact about the languages in which he taught. His books never mention being unable to teach any student how to read fluently. But listen to this. Dr. Laubach was able to quickly teach his students to read fluently because in 95% of the languages, students could learn to read in from 1 to 20 days. And in 98% of the languages, they could learn to read in less than 3 months.
It takes a lot longer than that for most Americans to learn to read, doesn't it? Is that because English is a more difficult language?
No, the problem is not with the language itself. The English language is neither among the easiest nor among the most difficult. The grammar and syntax of English is easier than many European languages, for example. In most European languages, students can learn to read fluently in less than 3 months. Dr. Laubach was able quickly to teach students to read fluently in 98% of the languages because these languages had an almost perfect phonemic spelling system. In other words, they spelled the words the way they sound. A perfect phonemic spelling system has one grapheme for each phoneme. A grapheme is a letter or a digraph, which is a 2-letter grapheme, to represent a phoneme, a syllable, or a word. A phoneme is the smallest sound used to distinguish between syllables and words in a language or dialect.
You told me before we started today that almost half of U.S. adults cannot read very well. How do you know that to be true?
In April 2002, the U.S. Department of Education released a report titled Adult Literacy in America, which proves this is true. And a follow-up report in 2006 confirms it. The Adult Literacy in America study was the most statistically accurate and comprehensive study of adult literacy ever conducted. It was based on a 5-year, $14 million study involving lengthy interviews of 26,049 adults, statistically chosen by age, gender, ethnicity, and location to represent the entire U.S. population. Interviewees were chosen from urban, suburban, and rural locations in 12 different U.S. states and included 1,100 prisoners from 80 different prisons to represent the entire U.S. population. The analysis of this report proves that 48.7% of U.S. adults are functionally illiterate, defined as being unable to read and write well enough to hold an above poverty level job. It also proves that 31.2% of these functional illiterates are in poverty, and proves that they are more than twice as likely to be in poverty because of their illiteracy as for all other reasons combined. With 31% of U.S. adults in poverty, this means that about 15% of all U.S. adults are in poverty, which is in close agreement with recent studies on U.S. poverty.
Those are certainly very shocking statistics. Why have I not heard this before?
The reason is that very few media reports of this study appeared, and the reports that appeared, in effect, minimized the seriousness of the findings. Most people do not realize the amount of illiteracy because illiterates are very good at hiding their illiteracy. We do not see much of the evidence for poverty because, first of all, most families have more than one employed adult, because low-income families receive help from government agencies, family, friends, and charities, and because of the natural separation that occurs between people in different economic groups.
If learning to read English does not take any longer because it's a difficult language, why does it take so much longer?
Learning to read English is difficult because the English language, written language, is not a logically designed alphabetic system. It is more like Chinese writing, which uses specific shapes in specific positions to represent a word. In English, a specific combination of letters in a specific order represents a word. Despite the difficulty that beginning readers, especially immigrants, have in learning to read, apologists for our present method of teaching reading will tell you that most English words are phonemic. That is true only if the phonemes are allowed more than one spelling. If each of the 38 phonemes needed to learn to read English were spelled with only one specific spelling, only about 20% of English words are phonemic. Having more than one spelling of the phonemes requires a huge amount of memorization because individual phonemes can be spelled in as many as 60 different ways. And the spelling of a phoneme will often vary from one word to the next. As a result, the only way to learn to read English is to add each new word to your reading vocabulary one at a time by rote memory or by repeated use of the word. Almost every American can read at least 1,000 simple words they learned in the first 3 grades in school. In order to be a fluent reader, however, one must be able to recognize 20,000 words or more by their spelling. Many of the fluent readers can read 70,000 words or more. Recognizing a correctly spelled word by its spelling and by its context is much easier than remembering the spelling of a word when you're trying to write it. Even many fluent readers are very poor spellers. Professor Julius Nikos of Washington and Jefferson College did an extensive study of 6 standard desk dictionaries. He found 1,768 ways of spelling 40 English phonemes. We only need 40 ways of spelling 40 phonemes, one each. If he had used unabridged dictionaries, he would have found even more. Other apologists for our present spelling system will tell you that people can learn to read using spelling rules. The truth is that there is not even one spelling rule that does not have exceptions, and some of the exceptions even have exceptions. A computer that was programmed with 203 English spelling rules was able correctly to spell only 49% of a list of 17,000 common English words. Can we honestly expect a human being to do better? A syllable in English can consist of a vowel all by itself, but each syllable has one vowel, and it can have a consonant or many consonants before and or after the vowel. There are only 38 phonemes to learn to be able to pronounce any word in English, and there are 26 letters, so 26 of the phonemes could be spelled with a single letter, and 12 of the phonemes could be spelled with a digraph, or 2 letters. Instead, we have at least 184 two-letter graphemes, at least 131 three-letter graphemes, at least 22 four-letter graphemes, and 4 or more five-letter graphemes.
Are you saying a combination of 5 letters is used to spell one sound in English?
Yes. More than half of all English phonemes are spelled with graphemes of 2 or more letters. There are at least 3 vowel phonemes and 1 consonant phoneme spelled with 5 letters that I know of. The most common is the word Weighed, W-E-I-G-H-E-D, in which 5 letters are used to spell the A phoneme. That sound is spelled only with the single letter A in words such as fading. Most English words have 2 or more syllables, and with multiple spellings of the phonemes, the syllables can have a very complicated arrangement of vowels and phonemes, or vowels and consonants. If each vowel and consonant in each syllable always had the same pronunciation, there would be nothing in the logic of these syllables that would be beyond the ability of most 4 or 5-year-olds, but they do not. The real confusion comes since a single grapheme can represent many phonemes for reading, and many graphemes are used to spell most of the phonemes. Although only 38 are needed, there are at least 367 different letters or letter combinations used as English graphemes, with an average of at least 9 pronunciations each. Some of the graphemes represent as many as 7 or more phonemes. There are only 4 of the 26 letters, B, K, P, and V, that have only one pronunciation. Adding to the difficulty, however, all 4 of these letters can be doubled in some words and not in others. Only 6 of the 26 letters are not doubled in any of the words. There are at least 44 different ways of spelling the 38 phonemes. The worst of all is the vowel phoneme, as in the word nut, which can be spelled in at least 60 different ways. If that is not nutty, I don't know what is. That is why learning to spell is more difficult than learning to read. More than one pronunciation of the graphemes and more than one spelling of the phonemes, it requires a type of logic that children do not develop until they are 11 or 12 years old. Before that age, they have difficulty thinking of the same letter or letters in more than one combination at the same time. So they just have to be helped to memorize or learn by repeated use each new word in their vocabulary. Most people do not know the spelling system in other languages, so they do not realize the comparative difficulty of learning to read English. Most of us learned to read as a child, and so we have long since forgotten or proudly dismissed the difficulty that we have. Our eyes glide easily over a multitude of traps for beginning readers.
I never realized that what I was reading was full of traps for beginning readers. What can be done about that?
Most teachers will tell you that reading is the foundation of all learning. Reading ability is required for classwork, homework, and testing in almost every subject in school. Dr. Laubach spent more than 40 years with teaching adults around the world to read in phonemic languages. And based on that, he stated on page 48 of his book, 40 Years with the Silent Billion, if we spelled English phonetically, American children could be taught to read in a week. Although present educators and politicians may have a financial interest in believing that this is overly optimistic, it would be a serious mistake to discount Dr. Laubach's findings or his advice. Other than remedial reading, most instruction in reading ends after fourth grade. But American students most of them require at least 2 years to learn to read well enough that they can keep increasing their reading skills after fourth grade. And almost half of students never become fluent readers. Statistics prove that almost half of adults never read an entire book after they leave school. If English were spelled as simply and as logically as other languages, our better students could learn to read English in 1 week, and all but the most mentally challenged could learn to read in less than 3 months, many of them much less than 3 months. 2 nonprofit educational corporations, Literacy Research Associates Incorporated and New English Incorporated, have developed a perfect phonemic spelling system such as Dr. Laubach recommended. It is a spelling system called New English, which has 10 beneficial characteristics that no other known proposed spelling system claims. And I've examined every proposed spelling system I can find. New English is so easy to read that present readers can learn the 10 simple spelling rules with only 6 to 8 minutes of time. This proposed spelling system is the only way to permanently end English illiteracy. More than 93 million U.S. adults read so poorly that they do not like to read and seldom try to read. They read so poorly that they cannot hold an above poverty level wage job. Although they can read 1,000 simple words, they are functionally illiterate. Along with an estimated 500 million adults around the world who speak English, who are also functionally illiterate in English, they desperately need our help to avoid the problems, pain, and suffering that their illiteracy causes. In addition, functional illiteracy costs every adult American, readers and non-readers, at least more than $5,000, an average of more than $5,000 each year for government programs that illiterates use, for truancy, juvenile delinquency, and crime directly related to illiteracy, and for the higher cost of consumer goods due to illiterates in the labor pool and in the workplace.
Hearing these facts and statistics makes me wonder if there is some reason why we don't make the changes you're suggesting.
When people learn that we are proposing spelling reform, they may be able to think of 1 or 2 objections to changing our spelling. Numerous respected scholars, however, have thoroughly disproven the validity of every objection to spelling reform. In addition, they have explained the benefits of making our spelling as simple as that of other languages. It doesn't take a genius to realize that it is much easier to learn the 38 phonemes and how to spell them and how to blend them into words than to learn every word in your reading vocabulary by rote memory or by repeated use. By learning to read quickly, English-speaking students can finally compete with students of the same age in other alphabetic languages if they study most of their subjects 2 years earlier.
All Are American students really that far behind students in other nations?
Yes, it is not well known by the general public, but American educators who are familiar with education in other nations and some of the members of think tanks, such as the American Enterprise Institute, know that American students are 2 years behind students using logical alphabetic languages. American students have ranked near the bottom in 3 or more recent scholastic competitions with more than 20 industrialized nations. Although there have been some improvements since the 1983 education report titled A Nation at Risk, there have been no overall statistically significant improvements in the teaching of reading for more than 90 years. Although there have been dozens of reports since 1983 about various educational problems, most of these reports did not receive the media attention they desperately need.
I thought of several questions, but our time is up. Do you have any closing remarks, Bob?
What I'm proposing is very simple. Let's spell our words the way they sound, the way the rest of the world does, the way we logically expect alphabetic languages to spell their words. The many facts supporting changing our spelling and the ease with which it can be accomplished are not quite so simple. My book, Let's End Our Literacy Crisis, provides these facts and is available free on our website, learntoreadnow.org.
Your book is available free?
Yes, it is an award-winning 265-page ebook with 164 pages of text, 8 appendices, 178 extensive notes and references, a glossary, and an extensive bibliography and an index, and numerous tables and figures. Among other things, it explains the disproven objections to spelling reform and lists the benefits of making our spelling logical and simple. There are roughly 600 million people around the world hoping that we can help them end their English functional illiteracy. Listen to this. All that is needed to begin the process of ending English illiteracy is to publicize the proven solution. I have been working passionately for many years, and I know as an absolute fact that what I'm proposing will not only solve the problem, but will be almost easier than almost anyone can really understand. And I know that anyone who looks at all the facts will agree with the proposal I'm proposing. Our website provides the proof of everything I have said here. As a result, I'm humbly asking listeners to tell at least 3 people about our learntoreadnow.org website who are not familiar with our humanitarian project of ending illiteracy. When enough people know about the seriousness of the problem and how easily it can be solved, the problem will be solved. Although what I have said here may raise more questions than it answers, a careful examination of our website will answer most of your questions. My book, Let's End Our Literacy Crisis, which is available free on the website, should answer all of your questions. Any remaining questions can be answered by our website. Despite all the naysayers and all those who oppose change, even change for the better, to believe that we cannot significantly improve the teaching of reading is to underestimate our human ability to solve our problem of inconsistent and illogical spelling instead of merely fighting the symptoms of the problem as we have been doing for almost a century now.